Hey everyone. So I have been talking a lot the last week or so about my journey with wearing a continuous glucose monitor and how beneficial it has been for me to start to assess something called my metabolic health. And so as I talk about metabolic health, most people think I'm referring to metabolism, and those are completely not the same things. And so metabolic health is really about how your body breaks down the food that you eat, specifically carbohydrates and sugars, and turns them into energy that your body can then use for every other cycle and process in your body. Uses energy in the form of what's called ATP, but essentially it's just energy that your body can use. And so I've learned a ton the last couple of weeks about this whole process and cycle and what it means to be pre-diabetic and diabetic and insulin resistant. And it's been really shocking to me the number of people that are unhealthy right now and don't really know it. I was in that camp. And so today what I want to do is start to break down what do some of those things actually mean, because you hear these terms, glucose and A1C and insulin resistant, but how does it actually fit together in a process around what you're eating? And so I'm going to use the board behind me to start to break some things down, and hopefully you can follow along and actually read my handwriting. So let's pretend that you eat some carbs or sugar, and that gets broken down to glucose. Okay, that is what your body's going to use primarily, unless you are on a ketogenic diet, then you'll be using fats, but we'll get to that later. But essentially you eat some carbs, you eat some sugar, your body breaks that down into its core component called glucose. And so what happens to that glucose? Primarily three things. It stays in the blood, and your body can pick it up, and cells absorb it and use it for energy. The second thing that happens is it gets pushed into your liver and muscles, stored as glycogen for your body to be able to use later. And lastly, it gets converted to triglycerides and stored in fat. So let's talk about the first one first. It stays in your bloodstream. It's pretty amazing. I was shocked to find this. There's only like 4 teaspoons or tablespoons of sugar in your blood at any one time. So your body is extremely efficient at when you eat carbohydrates or sugars, getting that glucose and doing something else with it. So at any one point in time, that's actually not a lot, even though as you measure it, you're going to see spikes and dips as your body is in the process of moving that around. And so most of the time it happens in these second two categories where it's going to get pushed into your liver or your muscles, again, stored as glycogen so that your body, if you need it, can use that energy and access it later. So we're going to dive into this a lot more. This is why exercise is extremely important to start to clear that glucose out of your system and clear those glycogen. But once your liver is full and once your muscles are full of glycogen, that's when your body trips it and sends it into fat cells. And so you're going to see a lot of fat around the liver. You're going to see a lot of fat around your organs first, and then you're going to start to see more of the abdominal fat and fat around the rest of the body, but it's actually going to accumulate around your organs first. And so nobody wants those things to be happening, right? We want to limit the amount of free glucose that we have out into the blood system. We want to really limit how much of that is getting pushed into fat stores and potentially being used for later. But that's why you see high triglycerides, high cholesterol, because of these two things and related to high glucose levels. And so we've eaten something, it's being stored, it's either in our blood right now or it's being stored for later. And so what happens when we need energy? Right? And I'm not just referring to like the afternoon pick-me-up, although that is part of the equation as well, and seeing some of these glucose spikes and numbers. And so what happens when we need energy? Well, we're going to pick it up from, a lot of the same places that we just stored it from, right? So we can get it from the blood, right? We used access free blood glucose that's already in the blood. We're going to pull it from the liver and muscles, right? We convert glycogen back to glucose so that we can use that energy. And we can also make it from other sources, specifically amino acids. So think of proteins, and we can make energy and glucose when we need to from other sorts of sources. Okay? Now, that's one way if we're going to use glucose as our primary energy system. The other way would be is if we are using fat as an energy system as well. So let me scoot back so you can actually see this. So we can also use fat as a source of energy. And so a lot of research, a lot of evidence that is saying that fat is a more effective and maybe a better form of use for energy. And that's why the ketogenic diets and some of these high-fat diets have really popped on the scene, where you see extreme carbohydrate limitations and eating much more healthier, higher fats. Personally, I do not respond well on a high-fat diet. And so I think that there's for me at least, that's the beauty of doing something like using a continuous glucose monitor. I can see how I respond to carbohydrates. I can see how I can respond to having too few carbohydrates and too many carbohydrates, and which foods do that, and see those responses for me. But this all becomes an issue, and becomes a big issue for you, because most of us, I was, not anymore, but most people in the United States are consuming extremely too many carbohydrates and sugar. And I know a lot of people are thinking, that's not me, my doctor hasn't said that I have an issue. And the problem is this process of, becoming insulin resistant, before it shows up in your blood system, you've had this process going on for years. By the time it does show up with an elevated A1C, elevated high insulin levels, you have so much more work to do to get that reversed than if you would have been tracking some of your glucose numbers or your fasting insulin much sooner. So by the time that you have a problem, it's not too late, but it's a much bigger problem than what you probably realize. And some of it comes down to the fact that we have been, we eat 10 times more sugar than we did 100 years ago. That's remarkable. There's 56 different names for sugar right now, different ingredients, and they don't just call it sugar, right? There's, like I said, 56 different ways on food labels to see, this is added sugar being dumped into the system. And so that's a whole nother talk about our, industrial food complex right now. But in general, only 12% of people in the United States actually are metabolically fit. So that means most of you right now listening or watching this actually have metabolic issues that you're not aware of. And so we're talking brain fog, fatigue, not sleeping well, lack of energy. Like the list goes on and on, where you may not be functioning as well as you could metabolically, but you also may not be having like really high cholesterol or really high A1C right now. But that doesn't mean that you're functioning as well as you actually could. So it's amazing. It was amazing to me that only 12% of people are actually considered metabolically healthy right now. But when you look at how many people are overweight and obese, it's pretty alarming. And so this, I think, is going to be the next major health issue. And a lot of it's because of what's happened with the COVID pandemic. It has forced everyone, not everyone, but a lot of health experts and scientists are understanding that people who are more metabolically unhealthy are more susceptible to these sorts of diseases. And so the number of people who fit into that category is staggering. And so it's up to us to actually begin to make those changes, because there's too much money involved for any kind of policy change to actually happen. It's going to come down to you taking charge of your own health, understanding what these numbers mean, understanding where you're actually at right now, and then you being able to make those positive changes for your health. And so it's going to come down to us. So what happens when we start to do this, and how does insulin resistant combat this? Well, when you eat these carbs and sugars, your blood sugar is going to go up, right? Stays in the blood until it gets converted to these things. So you see an elevation, a rise in blood sugar. Well, your body produces something called insulin from the pancreas to bring that blood sugar level back down to normal ranges. The problem is, when our blood system is when our blood glucose is consistently high, right? We've been told to eat small, frequent meals, or we just are eating like crap. Then, for the most part, for long stretches of the day, our blood sugar levels are going to be higher than they normally should be, and so our body is consistently pumping out more insulin to try to bring that back down. The problem is your cells start to become fatigued in that manner, I guess is one way of describing it. But essentially they become desensitized to it. And so your body, 5 years ago would have to produce less to bring your blood sugar levels down. After you eat a piece of pizza, may have to produce less insulin 5 years ago than they do now to get your blood glucose levels to the same spot. So you eat the same slice of pizza today and you ate it 5 years ago, more than likely your body is going to need more insulin now to bring that back down, unless you've been living an extremely healthy lifestyle, in which case you're probably not eating pizza, unfortunately. I love pizza. And so that's what insulin resistance, how that starts to form, and how insulin is related into blood glucose. And so what happens then when we see our blood glucose level high for really extended periods of time? What happens? Why is that an issue? Well, essentially it starts to create three bad things: inflammation, something called oxidative stress, and something else called glycation byproducts. And so I don't want to get super technical here, but most of you understand the concept of inflammation. High blood sugar absolutely causes high inflammation, okay? The second thing that happens is what's called oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is essentially you get increased free radicals floating around. That again causes inflammation. Free radicals is also associated with an increased risk of cancers. Glycation is essentially those glucose molecules create sticky products, and that's where you start to see damage to arterial walls, which leads to high cholesterol, along with changes in the liver. But essentially, it creates these three bad factors, which really affect health in some pretty serious ways. Specifically, we see, of course, high blood sugar is related to diabetes. Some people are aware that high blood sugar is also related to heart disease, stroke, dementia, Alzheimer's, infertility, and again, increased cholesterol levels. Sorry, my handwriting is really bad. But increased cholesterol levels as well. And so this is why this is important, right? You're looking at some of the major leading causes of death in the United States. Top 3 out of the top 5 are related to being caused by high blood sugars and going down the rabbit hole of long-term, chronic, debilitating diseases which negatively impact your health. And I see this every day, right? People, they work their butt off their whole life to be able to retire, and they haven't taken care of themselves, and now they're at a point where they have a bunch of these conditions, and they can't actually go out and enjoy their retirement because they've sacrificed their health to get to that point. And so that was one of my main and driving factors is, I've seen what this effect has on other people. I've seen what my family history looks like. And honestly, how this all got started is, I've got an amazing financial planner, and as part of his process, I needed to get life insurance. And so to do that, a nurse came out. Unfortunately, this nurse comes out to get blood from me the day after Christmas. And so, of course, my numbers were not very good. But honestly, that was 5 or 6 years ago, and I was not happy with where my numbers were at. Okay, it was all borderline, right? Like nothing out of control or crazy. But 5 years ago, I'm also in my early 30s at that time, and why am I having borderline high cholesterol? Why am I having borderline high blood glucose? My A1C was okay, but my glucose was high. So I chalked it off to the holidays and post-Christmas. However, I've got this running in the back of my head. So a couple months later, I get blood work again, and my numbers really haven't changed that much. So now I know that I actually have some problems and issues. And fast forward 5 years, here I am, and I still had those borderline high cholesterol, borderline high blood sugar, and I've got a family history of these issues. And so it's been driving me nuts for the last 5 years. I've tried all kinds of different diets, and a lot of different ways of tracking some of this stuff. But by far, what has made the biggest difference in being able to make informed decisions has been this continuous glucose monitor. And so my takeaway message is, first of all, don't just assume if you're thin like me, or if you don't feel like you overeat or you're younger, that you're not having metabolic issues, because the chances that you're in that 12% who are metabolically fit right now are actually really low. And so you need to be very honest with yourself and get yourself checked. You need to know 3 major numbers that are going to give you an idea of how metabolically fit and active as a baseline of where you're at. You want to know what your fasting glucose numbers are, you want to know what your fasting insulin numbers are, and you want to know what your A1C is. Most important that I would look at is what your fasting insulin numbers are, because what I've been seeing with patients that I'm working with is their insulin will start to rise before they actually see an increase in their A1C and their fasting glucose numbers. So what that is saying is that most people are actually are insulin resistant before it shows up in glucose and A1C numbers. And so that's why I say most blood tests are, when you go see your doctor, they're only looking at A1C and glucose. They're not looking at insulin. And most of you right now are insulin resistant. And so this is a major issue because you think you're okay. You're going to continue making the lifestyle choices that you are. And one day that's going to flip and you're going to be like me. You're going to have high A1C. You're going to have borderline high blood glucose. Your cholesterol might start to creep up. What happened? When did this change? It actually happened years ago. And so if you can start to make small, minor changes now, the changes that I'm looking to see that are making major differences in my numbers are not huge changes. They are absolutely changes that I can continue to do for a lifetime. They're changes that I know are going to positively impact me, and they're small changes, right? I'm an all or nothing guy, so I like making a ton of changes at once, right? I'm changing exercise, I'm changing diet, I'm changing sleep, all at once, because that's my mentality. When I work with other patients though, usually it's let's try one thing and see how it affects your numbers. And I'm not expecting everyone to go out and get a continuous glucose monitor. I think you should absolutely get those 3 things on a blood test and get a baseline of where you're at. The second thing that I would do if you are really, really serious about this is get a glucose testing monitor at home. They're cheap. You can go to Walmart and get one, Amazon. The strips that you use for them are very cheap. But a couple times a week, take your reading first thing in the morning. And if you need to know what ideal and healthy levels are, trust me, it's below 120. A really healthy individual is not like, oh, I'm 119, so I'm good. You need to be well below that to be considered metabolically healthy. And so, again, just some easy, some basics on all of this. I plan on breaking down all of these concepts in a lot more detail as I learn them, as I continue, as I'm working with patients to try to reverse these sorts of issues. So if you have any questions, let me know, reach out. I'm here to support you and I want to help. Thanks a lot.